Today's recipe is not German, it's actually from Turkey. I will make a pide bread and also an eggplant feta spread. When you go to a German farmer's market, you will find a big crowd around one stand every time. And this stand is a Turkish stand, and they have these wonderful, delicious feta spreads that we really like to have on our bread or on a Turkish flatbread, which is called pide. And on these stands, they hand out little samples of the spreads and the bread, and it's just delicious and people love it. So it's basically implemented in our German culture meanwhile. So we wouldn't want to live without the Turkish food. When I was in my early 20s, I lived above a Turkish grocery store. It was a really tiny place. They had most of the vegetables. They were super fresh and delicious outside of the store, and inside you could buy the feta and some other things. I really like that. So I'm very familiar with the Turkish food, and that's why I want to introduce you to this too. I'm pretty sure you will love it. So for these two recipes, I need these ingredients. 270 grams of flour. It's an all-purpose flour. You can also use a bread flour. Also 200 milliliters of lukewarm water. 1 package of yeast, that's 7 grams or a quarter ounce. And if you don't have yeast and you're using yeast water, then you could use the entire liquid as yeast water. Also, you need 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of sugar. So that's for the pide bread. And for the eggplant spread, you need an eggplant, which are growing plenty in my garden at the moment. Also some feta, some heavy cream, not a lot, and fresh garlic, as much as you like to have in it. So you notice I don't tell you how much of everything because it very much depends on the size of your eggplant and all these things and how dry your feta cheese is. So when you mix it together, you kind of even it out to a very nice consistency. For those who are not familiar with the metric system, you will find all the ingredients on my blog post, and there you can, right under the ingredient list, switch between the metric and the US customary system. So don't worry, you will find everything in the measurement that you prefer. There. I'll start with the pide bread, and I will first add the yeast to the water. And always make sure that your water is not too hot because that would kill your yeast. So it's just lukewarm. And I'm adding this to make sure that it's active. So the people who sell you the yeast, the companies that make the yeast, they will always tell you you don't need to do that, because they are convinced that their yeast is fresh and working, but they never know how you stored it or how long it has been on the shelf in the store. So I often prefer to make sure that the yeast is active. While I'm waiting for that to bubble, I'm putting the flour into the mixing bowl, and I'm adding the sugar first. And on the sides, I'm adding the salt. Okay, and I'll give this a little moment, and then I'll continue. Here you can see there's quite some action and foam going on here, so it's ready to be added to my flour. And I don't have to worry about using too much of the liquid because this is going to be a very sticky dough. I will knead this now for 5 minutes. So here you can see it's a very, very sticky dough. But that's no problem because we don't have to knead it with hand. We just need to put it into the baking pan now. All right. So for the baking pan, I choose a flat round pie pan. You can also use a rectangular or square pan to make this bread, but usually it comes round. So I decided to make it as authentic as possible. Now let me take this dough out. And you see I put some parchment paper in here. Okay, so now the difficult part is to spread it out a little bit. So it's easiest if you make these tools a little wet and then just try your best to get it all into all directions. Okay, so now I will cover this with a towel and let it rise for about 50 minutes. Now for the eggplant feta spread, I need to prepare my eggplant. I'm removing the stem and the outer ends, and I'm slicing it into 2 halves, like this. And I have some oil here, and I put some on it directly. And then I put these 2 halves onto a baking pan or baking sheet that is covered in oil. And I put this into the oven for roughly 30 minutes. It depends very much on the size and shape of your eggplant. So the reason for putting it into the oven is to cook it fully through, so it is very soft at the end. Let's take a look at the dough. Oh yes, and you can see it has a really good rise. I don't know if you can see it on the top camera. So it's almost all the way to the top of the baking pan. And now I'm making the typical shape of this bread on the top, which looks like this. So I make my hands a little wet. And then I turn it a little bit. And I'm currently preheating the oven to 200 degrees Celsius, which is 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, and I'm spreading some water on top. You could also use some egg wash or some milk, but I'm using this. Now, typically when I buy this bread in Germany on a market or a Turkish shop, they come with some topping on it. And this is usually something called Kreuzkümmel and sesame. Kreuzkümmel, I don't even know what it's in English. I use just a little bit of my poppy seeds instead of that. And I sprinkle that on top here. And the oven is ready. And some sesame seeds. This is of course optional, you don't have to do that. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. A little more here maybe. Okay, so this goes now into the oven, roughly for 20 to 30 minutes. We'll see. Depends a little bit on your oven and on the shape and size of your baking pan. While the pita is in the oven, I will now prepare the eggplant feta spread. And the eggplants have been in the oven for about 25-30 minutes. And they're really, really soft. Now you can see this here. And I will just, you could use the entire eggplant, but my eggplants have a really very thick skin. So I'm just using the inner part of it. And it's quite easily removed, as you can see. The German name for eggplants is aubergine, and that's also how we call the color. So yeah. And they grow like crazy in my garden this time. So last year I planted them and I was a little late with it, and so they had like 4 eggplants maybe, and then came cooler temperatures and nothing happened anymore. And I forgot to take them out of the beet, and so this spring when I was doing my vegetable garden, I noticed they're still there, and I thought, let's rip them off. And then I thought, maybe just leave them, because I noticed some of these little flowers on it, and I thought it might be a little bit of a crop. So I left them, and as I said, I have so many eggplants, I don't even know what to do with all of them. But this is a really good solution, and it tastes very delicious. So let's continue and add some of the feta cheese. And I don't really have, like the exact measure or something. One of these pots here holds 113 grams. That is 4 ounces. And I can imagine if you don't have feta cheese, maybe it works also very well with some cream cheese. Okay, let's be careful. I can still add a little more later. I'm also adding a little bit of cream because this is a very dry feta. And now I'm preparing the garlic. And it depends on your own taste how much garlic you want. I want a lot of garlic in here. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're also crazy about it. It really tastes delicious. And the garlic is part of that. You can also use a garlic press, of course, but this works very nice too, especially with a big clove of garlic. Okay. Now, some people complain about the color of this spread because it tends to be a little bit grayish. There's a solution to it. If you want to have a little bit of a pink color, you could add just a tiny little bit of tomato paste. Okay. And what I also like to do, I'm adding a little bit of olive oil to make it even more creamy. I might add a little more in a minute. So now I'm using my immersion blender, and you could also use a stand mixer or any kind of mixer that would put this into a creamy consistency. Okay, can add a little more of the tomato paste for the color, but I don't want to use too much because I don't want it to taste like tomatoes. So I'm still careful with it. I mean, you could also use some food color if that's something you can consider. Okay, that's it. That's all you need to do to make this delicious spread. And those people who have these stands on the markets, I'm pretty sure they make a fortune with it. Okay. And usually I don't have to add any salt or anything. The feta is very salty anyway. But let's taste it. It tastes very, very good. I want to add a little more of the olive oil. Okay. Fantastic. And it will be even better after like an hour when it was in the fridge and it has all soaked a little bit through with the garlic. So I'll put this aside in the fridge, and the bread needs another 10 minutes, which tells me that this just took 10 minutes and it's really quick. So this was in the oven now for 32 minutes. And while it is still hot, I will again brush some water on the top of this bread because it's supposed to be a very soft bread. So it's not supposed to have a crisp crust or anything like that. All right, and I cover it with a towel and let this stand for about 10 minutes. Okay, and after 10 minutes I take the towel away and have this wonderful bread. It's still hot. And I let this cool now completely. Yeah, and so now it's already ready to eat. I will take a little bit of this bread, and this is basically how they do it on the market. They give you like a piece of bread like this, and they put some of this bread on it, and then they reach it to you over the counter, which we can't do anymore right now. And yeah. And they have like at least 30, if not more, of these different feta cheese spreads that are one more delicious than the next one. And this is so good. And it's also a really great summer snack when you're outside on the patio, if you have one. Have a glass of wine and just enjoy some Turkish bread. And it was so good. I probably can't stop eating this. Yeah, definitely give this recipe a try. It's really, really good. Thank you for watching. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't yet. And wait for the next video.